You know, it's so sad to see two men who helped save the Earth from an asteroid fight like this. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Daredevil. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows that are based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair, I got two co-hosts. First up, a man with radar sense when it comes to breaking down a movie. Please welcome from the 80s flick flashback, it's Tim Williams.
I never miss.
And our very own kingpin of pop culture knowledge from Pop Culture Roulette, it's Nicholas Pepin.
I always miss.
All right, well, we are here to talk about whether this 2003 Daredevil movie is a hit or a miss, and talk about the comic book connections, because I really got to say, probably more so than some of the shows we've done recently, there's actually a lot of comic book connections with this one. But yeah, we are talking about the 2003 Ben Affleck-led Daredevil, which, like so many Marvel movies, Deadpool has done this, Daredevil has done this, and the upcoming Captain America Brave New World has done this. They're releasing on Valentine's.
Interesting choice.
Yeah. Again, one of the reasons why Bethany and I do a Valentine's Day date night for the show. They're just perfect. But yes, this was released on Valentine's Day in 2003. And so I will ask, did either of you take a date to see this on Valentine's Day?
I did not.
I think I went with a group of guys, so no.
Yeah, I didn't see this in the theater. I saw this one on DVD after it had already been out for a while.
I did see this one in theaters. I too, like Nicholas, I did not take a date. I think I went with a group of guys because I was still in college at the time. So I think we went out. I don't think we saw it like on opening weekend. I think we saw it like later in its run, because I don't remember it being like a very full theater. Although this movie didn't do horrible in the theaters.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was more critically panned. If anything. But yeah, so we've got the theatrical cut of Daredevil, and I do say theatrical cut because there does exist a director's cut, and we will talk about that actually next week. So we will do our best to avoid talking about the director's cut in this episode.
I promise.
But we are talking. So we are talking about just the 1 hour and 43 minute run of Daredevil. But speaking of the director who is also the guy who wrote the screenplay, and he's the guy who would later go on and do Ghost Rider, and that's Mark Steven Johnson. Were y'all aware it's the same guy who did Ghost Rider?
Yes.
I did when I started doing some of the research.
When you did your research, yeah.
Yes. That's when I knew.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Were you aware, or was it a surprise, maybe when you rewatched it for recording this, that if you paid attention to the opening credits, I'm assuming, to see Kevin Feige's name as a producer?
No, I think you and I have had the conversation because we did Blade and we've done a couple other movies that Feige has been there as a producer from the beginning. Yeah.
He was just a lesser producer. Because he's listed in this one as co-producer with some other guy. I didn't even pay attention or make a note of who he's listed to. And then it's not until several credits later that then you get the list of actual like producers, which include Avi Arad, who was on every Marvel movie at this time. So, but I find it funny to watch some of these movies that people pan, that people look down upon now that we have the MCU, and I'm going, it's the same dude, same dude behind it. Clearly he has more power, and maybe that has helped.
And learn from the mistakes that were made around him.
Yeah.
True. Very
For
true.
Sure.
All right, but let's go ahead and start getting into some of the comic book connections when it comes to Daredevil.
This is the comic book connection theme.
The 2003 Daredevil movie draws heavily from some of the most iconic comic book runs in Daredevil's history. The film borrows its central themes and storylines from Frank Miller's groundbreaking work on the character, particularly his Man Without Fear origin story, as well as the Elektra saga. Elements like Matt Murdock's intense Catholic guilt, his gritty life in Hell's Kitchen, and his tragic romance with Elektra are lifted straight from Miller's pages. Additionally, the depiction of Bullseye as a lethal, almost psychopathic assassin and Kingpin as a ruthless crime lord reflect their portrayals in Miller's run and subsequent adaptations. The movie also tries to capture Daredevil's signature blend of street-level crime fighting and emotional complexity, which has defined the character since his debut in 1964 by creators Stan Lee and Bill Everett. While the movie takes liberties with some details, its DNA is firmly rooted in these classic comic book tales. Let's talk about Frank Miller, because I know, especially Nicholas probably has thoughts on this. So, what are your thoughts on Frank Miller's take on Daredevil, which I will say this absolutely steals from, more so than the vast history of Daredevil?
It's very clear. I mean, you can tell that even from some of the art. I mean, some of the scenes that they took from the comic, when we get to that section, we'll talk about it. But it's amazing when you look at the influence that Frank Miller has had on Daredevil and some of the, Marvel stuff. And then we also have talked about him many times over with the DC stuff. Like, his fingerprints are all over everything that's happening in the movies these days.
Oh, absolutely. But we say these days, we're talking about a movie that's 22 years old now.
But I'm saying even stuff like some of the modern takes on Batman. Yeah. I mean, some of the stuff that Batman's going through is out of Frank Miller.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
Of course, you could make the argument that Frank Miller just wrote Daredevil like Batman, so...
There's some similarity. Well. Yeah, there's some similarities there for sure.
But of course, they do, even Frank Miller, does take his Daredevil from the original, from 1964, because even when Miller retold the origin story in Man Without Fear, which was in 93, so almost 30 years after the character had been introduced, he still followed the same stuff. It's still an accident from him saving an old man from being hit by a truck, which they don't do in the movie. They still have where all of his senses get enhanced, although I did find a kick out of in the original comic, when he's talking about his senses, when he gets to touch, he talks about how his touch is so sensitive that just by touching a gun, he can tell you how many bullets are in it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that his taste is so acute that he can tell you how many grains of salt are on a pretzel.
All right.
And then in both cases, this is something that's different from the movie. His dad is not beaten to death. In both the original story and in Miller's version, the dad is shot. So there's that. But so again, Miller does keep the origin story.
Was it in Crime Alley?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and a whole bunch of pearls fall for no random reason.
In slow motion in the rain.
Yeah. Now, the Man Without Fear does introduce the character, well, not introduce, because he was already introduced, but to the origin story, introduces in the character of Stick.
Mm-hmm.
It actually has Stick training Matt Murdock right from the beginning, which didn't happen in the original origin story. We're going to get into the characters a little bit more, but I'm going to go ahead and ask about Stick. Because I assume both of y'all are familiar with the character, especially because maybe of the Netflix series. And then also the Elektra movie?
Yes.
Yes, but I also, this is a good one for me. I actually own the Frank Miller run of Daredevil. I bought a collection of that at a comic convention several years ago when the Daredevil TV show was still on and pretty popular. So I've actually read that, the first 5 issues of that is what I have. But so seeing the origin story there. So I was, when the movie started, I was like, I didn't remember Stick being a part of this movie, but I was kind of shocked that he's not not even alluded to, like to come up later, a little Easter egg here, nothing, like just completely wiped out of that part of the story.
All right, listeners, go ahead and make note of the date and time that we are talking about a movie that Tim is actually very familiar with the comic. It is a milestone to mark. So
I will say, if I was really good, I would have taken the time to read the comic again. It's been a couple years since I read it, but I do own it. So
what are your thoughts, Nicholas, about no mention or inclusion of Stick?
I mean, clearly Matt Murdock just trained himself by some bad CGI and doing parkour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I love how this is kind of going a little bit into later in the show, but I'm just going to say it now. I love how his sense of touch just apparently allows him to be really good at balancing. And he can do one-handed handstands and somehow makes him stronger. Because he says that.
Yeah.
He literally says it makes him stronger.
Yeah.
How does touch make you stronger?
And I don't know how it makes him like jump from building to building that's clearly, hundreds of feet away and with no issue. Like moving your legs in the air obviously does help because it seems that helps him get further across.
Yeah. There's some pushing here, but you know what? We've got a whole section on that.
Yeah, we'll get there
in the second half of the show, so we'll get into that. Nicholas brought up a lot of the artwork. I do want to mention that pretty much one of the first shots we get is of Daredevil, like hugging the cross on top of the church, which is a dead-on shot, not from Frank Miller. That is actually from the Guardian Angel storyline, which was written by Kevin Smith, and then the art was done by Joe Quesada. But you could put them side by side, and it is the exact same shot.
Yeah, no, I saw that, and I was like, I know I've seen that picture.
Yeah. Yep, Joe Quesada, who is referenced as one of the characters. So.
Yeah, he's got to be super thrilled about that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, look, they made a movie. They called him Joel Quesada instead of Joe Quesada, but then they also made him a terrible rapist.
Yep, this is true. This is true. So let's go ahead and get into the cast. Of course, as most people know, we've got Ben Affleck as Matt Murdock, or Daredevil. Ben Affleck was a big fan of the comic. He's a big fan of the character. In fact, when he found out that his buddy Matt Damon was being considered, he actually was like, "Hey, I love this character." So, but did you hear that Vin Diesel was almost Daredevil?
Yeah, that would not have been good.
No. I saw a few names on the
not.
list that I was like, no, not at all.
I did too. I sometimes, though, when it comes to those lists that you find online, I'm almost like, is this a list of people they actually went after, or was this just a brainstorming, like, who could we get?
Right.
And then just, like, there was never any actual talk. But the thing about Vin Diesel made it sound like he actually was in the running, and the only reason he didn't do it was he had some other movie he had to do.
Yeah.
He wanted to do Riddick instead.
Yeah, which he made the right choice there.
I agree.
Yeah, when we get to Elektra, that list that was on that I read online, I'm like, this was just like a let's throw things at the wall and see what sticks, because half those actresses were never ever going to do a comic book movie in 2003.
Yeah.
Nah.
I think it's just a list of like, who are the most popular people right now that would possibly think of, maybe consider doing this movie, but no real talks were made.
Yeah. The only names I saw that seemed legit, like it was an actual attempt to get them to play it, was Vin Diesel and then Guy Pearce.
Yeah, which I thought was an interesting choice.
I thought that one was interesting as well. But apparently he, according to what I read, he turned it down because he didn't like quote-unquote comic stuff.
Even though he came back, he changed his mind a few years later when he was in Iron Man.
Yeah, when they made it cool and everybody was doing it,
all
of a sudden, all of a sudden your tune changes.
Well, they were making money too, so I'm sure the paycheck was a lot better for that one too.
Oh, I'm sure. And then, as Nicholas has been waiting so much to talk about, Jennifer Garner as Elektra. We we have already covered the Elektra movie. Nicholas and I did. It's one of Nicholas's favorites. So here we are introduced to that character with Jennifer Garner, who actually does do most of her own stunts and her psi work. I know recently when there was a spoiler for anybody who doesn't already know this, but when she was getting ready to make her cameo in Deadpool and Wolverine, there was like an Instagram video of her actually practicing with the sais.
Saw that.
But you do know that there's a lot of criticism about the way she handles the sais.
Yep.
Because she puts her fingers between the prongs, which defeats the whole purpose of the sai. Because it's a defensive weapon. It's not an offensive weapon. So the idea is supposed to be that those prongs block and trap the weapon of the person attacking you. And if she's putting her fingers there, then she's putting her fingers in danger if she's actually using the sai.
Details. Who needs details? It looks cool.
All right, Nicholas, we'll go ahead and have your fun. What all do you need to say about Elektra?
I think I said it all the when we talked about Elektra, so we don't need to go back over that. I mean, it just, she obviously did a way better job and was given more to work with in Elektra than she was in this movie.
True.
Mm-hmm.
And, when we talk about it in the next episode, the difference between the two movies, I don't know. They didn't really give her much to do in this one. It was kind of like she was an afterthought.
Yeah.
Well, when Frank Miller created her, he created her as a throwaway character.
Well, because
like she was meant for that Elektra Saga storyline, and then she was meant to be this. This ain't spoiling anything. Everybody knows it. She was meant to be killed by Bullseye and then never seen again.
Well, there's a lot of characters that are like that, and then they get so popular they have to figure out how to bring them back to life. But
or retcon them in somewhere.
I saw it in a couple places where people were saying it was a goof, that it was it was a thing that was straight out of the art of when Bullseye picks up her sai and jabs her in the stomach and lifts her up. And the sai doesn't go through the back of her outfit.
Yeah, I read that
That's
too.
a straight art panel.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are like, oh, I can't believe they can't figure that out. It was a goof. It's like, no, that's how it was in the art. Now, it was like that in the art because at that time, the comic code wouldn't allow them
to see.
To show.
To show it. So they had to show that she was stabbed.
They covered it with her vest.
Yeah. But, but that you can tell the people who were putting that as a goof are people who didn't actually read the comics.
Yeah.
No.
And I'll say...
So who were...
I was going to say, just with her storyline as well, I think it wasn't as fleshed out either, because even the writer and director, as you mentioned before, he said one of the things he regrets about the movie is he tried to put too much into it. He tried to tell origin story. He wanted the Elektra saga. It was like he sees the flaws and why it wasn't as well perceived. And I think it's like introducing her in the origin movie may not have been the best choice. I think she would have had more. They would have introduced her, as like towards the end, and then for a sequel, bring her back and give her more of that story. Would have been a better idea. But I'll say, Jennifer Garner at this time, I never watched the show Alias, so I wasn't as familiar with her until the movie came out. Yeah. But it's funny, watching it now, because I've seen her now, knowing her in the last, probably 10, 15 years. She's a mom. She's done all these, she's the Capital One commercial, and, she's done more of these, rom-coms and stuff. So to see her in, this, tough, be this tough character was kind of hard for me to see her that way, because I'm not used to seeing her. But I know in Alias, that's kind of the character she was. So I actually want to go back and watch Alias now, because I was like, oh, I really need to watch that show, because she can...
Alias is essentially why they gave her the job as Elektra.
I remember that when it came out,
She already kind of is this character. Let's just hire her.
I too was not actually a viewer of Alias, but I was aware of Jennifer Garner at the time.
Yeah, same.
But I didn't really know her as an actress at this point. But they could have at least, because in the comic, she is a college love interest that returns, and he sees her again. This is not in the comic. He's not meeting her
for the first time
at this story point. Yeah, he had known her from college, and then her father is killed while they are in college, and she leaves, and then she becomes an assassin, and then when they re-meet up, now Daredevil and Elektra. But before we get too much into that, let's go back and talk about, because Nicholas, you brought up the list of actresses. Was there anybody on that list that you think maybe could have been Elektra, or were they all?
I don't really remember the list. I just remember seeing a couple of the names, and I was like, that was never a consideration. That was one of those, like, we're putting out a casting list, this is who we want, and then we'll get somebody like Jennifer Garner, because we're never going to get, I don't even remember who the biggest actress of 2003 was. But
so I did write down the list that I saw. So the list I saw included Kate Winslet, Penelope Cruz, Selma Hayek, really, Natalie Portman, Lucy Liu, Jessica Alba, and Katie Holmes.
I see maybe one or two names on that list that could have done it, and the rest of them would have, all fine actresses, and I've enjoyed a lot of their work. But other than maybe Jessica Alba, because Jessica Alba would have been coming off a Dark Angel at that time.
Mm-hmm. So it's very similar.
Very similar. And Lucy Liu, especially at that time, Charlie's Angels.
This would have been around Charlie's Angels.
Right.
So either of them could have done it. But, like, I like Selma Hayek. She's done a lot of really great movies, but there's no way she could have done Elektra.
No. Not at all. Also, would you have to change that Elektra's Greek? Because Selma Hayek, you're not getting rid of that accent.
No.
Look,
Same goes for Penelope Cruz.
It was hard for me to believe that Jennifer Garner was Greek, but, that's another story.
Oh, those blue eyes didn't do it for you?
I thought they were green.
They were definitely...
Or green eye, whatever.
They put green. They put green contacts
the unnatural contacts that were in her eyes.
That changed from scene to scene, like how green they were. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the bad guys. We'll start off with Bullseye, played by Colin Farrell. He had to be happy when they went, you don't have to do any type of accent.
Mm-hmm. Just be Irish.
Talk.
Yeah.
Just be yourself, Colin.
And then they said, chew as much scenery as you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So what did you think of the tattoo on his forehead? Obviously not from the comics.
No, because normally he's got the blue and gray outfit with the bullseye on his forehead.
Yeah, on the part of the costume, yeah.
Yeah, this comes again from the era, and I think we just had this conversation recently, of where they were like, we want to do the comic book movies, but they didn't want to do the comic accurate costume, which for Daredevil they actually did.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Which is strange, given that they were so against it for every other movie they were doing at the time. But it was like, we've already got this ridiculous world where there's a blind lawyer running around, Hell's Kitchen doing superhuman feats of gymnastics.
Yeah.
Putting this guy in a crazy costume is a bridge too far.
Which is funny when he says, like, I want a costume.
Right.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get one.
No.
But so rather than put him in a costume, let's brand his forehead.
Right. But the way he like always touches it and feels around it, I think he gave himself the if he branded himself,
he carved it into
he did it himself. Yeah. So. I do like that he wears like the beanie to like cover it up, where he's not just walking around all the time with his bulls on his forehead that just says, "Look at me, I'm a bad guy."
Yeah, but was that a story element, or was it they just didn't want to worry about the makeup for a few shots?
Well, I did read that because it was the certain makeup they used, if he started to sweat, it would bubble up, and so he had to stay, wearing all that leather. I'm sure was tough to do. I'm sure it gets hot, but
this is true. And then our other main bad guy, the ultimate Daredevil villain, Wilson Fisk, a.k.a. Kingpin, played by the late, great, I cannot think of a single bad thing this man has ever done, Michael Clark Duncan.
Yep.
Who also was the voice of Kingpin at the same time for the animated series.
Yeah, I read that too. But he perfect. Of everybody in this movie, he's the most perfectly cast, I think. Like, he just embodied Kingpin to me.
Yes.
And
I mean, the size, the voice.
Yes.
The voice, the
Which
presence.
Did you hear they asked him to put on weight?
Yes.
Yeah.
which he was not happy about.
The man is already a house.
Yeah.
But he did it by putting on muscle. Like he didn't like gain.
Well, from what I read, yes, he put on muscle, but he also just ate whatever he wanted. Yeah. He does have a little bit of a push.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, but he's still a big guy.
When they go to square off at the end, he takes his shirt off. Yeah. He's got a bit of a punch there. But he's going to what Nicholas was saying. He's so different from the comic book character who is more of a fat man, large man, but a fat man. And of course, notorious, famously a white man. Mm-hmm. I have no problem with Michael Clarke Duncan being Kingpin, but did you like it better of him being more muscular than just large? Because, and we'll go ahead and talk about the Netflix series a little bit here, but Vincent D'Onofrio goes back more comic book accurate, where he's just large.
Right.
But here we got Michael Clarke Duncan, who is clearly muscular.
I think
does that take you away from Kingpin, or does it work?
No, because I'm thinking more of the menacing and the presence he carries. Like, it's not so much his size as his persona. And I think,
absolutely.
I think both him and D'Onofrio gave that in both incarnations of the character. So,
yeah. And even though he was muscular, it wasn't like he was like, Arnold Schwarzenegger at his peak muscular.
Right.
Like he didn't have like a 16 pack. Like, he was still, he still had a little gut in him, but he was still large. And I thought it was funny because, Michael Clarke Duncan was a very large man in real life. He was 6'5". He was very big. And they, for some reason, were like, hey, even though you're bigger than everyone already anyway, put on some more weight.
Right.
Affleck, because we talked about him already, was 6'4", or is 6'4". So, when they had him in scenes together, they had to put Michael Clarke Duncan on a box, which had to be weird because normally it's the other way around. Like,
right.
I bet Michael Clarke Duncan is used to people being on boxes next to him.
Yeah. Well, they had to do that with him in Green Mile too, because they had to make him look even bigger
than he was.
And then also, actors like Tom Hanks, and I can't think of the other guy that plays one of the other guards. Both of them are very tall actors.
Yeah.
I also noticed that a lot of the Kingpin camera angles were always looking
up.
Looking up at him.
Yeah.
It's like, man, he's 6'5", and you still have to find a way to make him look bigger. Like,
gotta be.
And then you pair him with Leland Orser, who played Wesley, who is a small guy.
Right.
So
it worked there.
It worked. But yeah, no, Michael Clarke Duncan is great. I don't think I have ever been upset with him in any performance.
Nope.
Would have even loved him to have returned as Kingpin for the Netflix series, had it not been for his passing. So, yeah, great. And let's talk about someone, though, who does return later in the MCU, and that's Jon Favreau.
Yeah.
But as a different character, here he's playing Franklin Foggy Nelson. I did find out that Seth Rogen apparently auditioned for this role.
He did.
And the only reason he didn't get it was he was too young.
Yeah.
So
he was like 19, 20 at the time.
Yeah.
But here we have Jon Favreau, who would later go on to, some will say, begin the MCU by directing Iron Man, and would have his role as Happy Hogan. What'd you think of Jon Favreau in this almost just bit part?
Yeah.
When you talk about the theatrical cut.
Yeah.
He was essentially just being Jon Favreau.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, when is he not, though?
I did read that he did strike up a relationship with Kevin Feige on set.
Right.
So this movie...
That would make sense.
We'll get to the decision when we get to it, but this movie is the progenitor of the entire MCU. It didn't start it because clearly the MCU ignores this Daredevil altogether. But, it did until Deadpool Wolverine.
It did until Deadpool and Wolverine. Yeah. And then we've got another great actor, Joey Pants.
Yes.
Joe Pantoliano as Ben Urich, who people who don't know this, because if you're not familiar with the comic book, he is a character from the comics. He is a reporter that is in a lot of Daredevil. Didn't debut until the 70s, and he works for the Daily Bugle, but they couldn't use the Daily Bugle in this movie because that's part of the Spider-Man property that Sony owned at this point. So they just had him work for the New York Post, which I was totally fine with. But you talk about another kind of, you almost wonder what the crap he is doing in this movie. Joey Pants here is Ben Urich.
What is he not good in? So, I mean, he was fine. Underutilized, I think, but still good.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, depending on which version of this movie you're talking about.
Again, we're talking about the theatrical version.
Yeah.
In the theatrical version, underused.
Definitely. But I don't think he's fully used in the director's cut either. But he gets a little bit more.
To that
but
next week.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good. We've already talked about Leland Orser playing Wesley Owen Welch. Another character from the comics, just to let people know, debuted in the 80s. And then a blink and you'll miss it performance from Grey's Anatomy's own Ellen Pompeo as Karen Page, who is she's right up there as one of the main members of the Daredevil team in the comics, but she's got one quick little moment in this movie, and that's it.
Okay. I was watching the director's cut today, and I'm like, oh, that's right, she's in this. Did they cut her out of the theatrical one? And I was like,
she's got one scene.
That's it.
The scene where she gives him the invitation. That is the only scene she's in the theatrical cut.
Okay.
So that's our cast, but I think we're going to have more fun talking about the cameos and the references of people that are in this. So, of course, you've got your Stan Lee cameo, but Frank Miller even has a cameo. Frank Miller is
a dead guy.
As a dead guy, yeah. He is all the screen shows for that second. Man with a pen in his head as Bullseye is stealing his motorcycle. Frank Miller, the guy who we just talked about, this movie, the tone and atmosphere of this movie is based off of his comics, his version of Daredevil. He's got a cameo. Also, Kevin Smith, who, again, we talked about the Guardian Angel storyline that he wrote. He has a cameo playing a character named Kirby, which has to be a reference to Jack Kirby. There's no question about it.
No question.
But little throwaway scene there with Kevin Smith. Then we mentioned this earlier, Paul Ben Victor. He's not the cameo, but this is a reference. He plays a character named Quesada, which of course, as we mentioned earlier, is a reference to Joe Quesada, who not only was the artist for Daredevil, but he was also the current, at the time, editor-in-chief of Marvel. Then you've got Eddie Fallon, who was played by Mark Margolis, who was the guy trying to get Jack to throw the fight.
Right.
He's a character from the comics. He's a character that was called the Fixer, that is from the original, both Miller and Stan Lee's original origin story. But did y'all notice his bodyguard sitting next to him during the fight?
No.
Jason Voorhees himself, Kane Hodder.
Oh, wow. Man,
I
missed it both times.
Yeah. Kane Hodder is playing his bodyguard. Just sits next to him during that fight, and that's it. And then did you see who Jack was fighting in that final fight?
John Romita.
Not the actor, but we see the name on the marquee outside that he is fighting John Romita. Now, whether that's senior or junior, I don't know, because both John Romita Sr. and John Romita Jr. are both legendary comic book artists with Marvel. And so there's that little reference there as well. So like Tim mentioned earlier, Johnson did say he tried to put way too much in terms of comic references and everything into this movie.
Yeah.
Well, there was a list. I don't. Are you done with your list, or do you got a couple more?
No, I'm done with my list.
Okay.
Did you find some more?
Yeah, there was the list of fighters that he beat. It was Miller, Bendis, and somebody else.
Oh wow, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. So
awesome.
Miller gets 2 bites. He gets to be in it, and they
reference his name.
Yeah, he lists like 3 or 4 fighters that he beat, and every one of them were writers.
That's awesome.
That's a good.
No, I didn't catch that one.
Good Easter egg there.
Yeah. I love Brian Michael Bendis as an author, so I heard, and Bendis is such a strange name. When I heard it, it stuck out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, when they show that marquee and I just see John Romita, and I was like, hey, look at there. Immediate recognition of the name. Or when they're having the trial at the beginning and you hear, I think Froggy's the first one that says Caseta. And I was like, oh, hey, I know that name. All right, well, let's go ahead and for anyone who hasn't seen this, again, this is a 22-year-old movie, but for anyone who hasn't seen this, we always like to tell you before we start digging deeper into the movie, should you see it or should you just read a comic instead? So, Tim, I'll let you go first on this one.
You know what?
Considering you've read the comics.
Yes, I know. There are better iterations, but it's not a terrible movie. Like, it still does a decent job of telling you who the character is. I think it's a decent introduction to the character to maybe get you to want to read the comic, kind of like it did for me. So yeah, I think you should watch it, but you should still read the comics as well.
I mean, considering what they were doing with comic book movies at the time, and even for the next couple that came out afterwards, it's not that bad. But there are so many great Daredevil was one of the first comic books I ever read. A friend of mine had a bunch of comic books, and it was Daredevil and Punisher, and I think Spider-Man, but I distinctly remember like reading Daredevil comic. I couldn't tell you for the life of me what any of the runs were, because it would have been in the mid-'80s. So who knows who was writing it or drawing it. But Daredevil was one of the first comic books I distinctly remember reading. So, like, when they were like, oh, we're doing a Daredevil movie, I was jazzed. So, yeah. I mean, see the movie, but definitely the Miller run, the Kevin Smith run, the Joe Quesada run,
Yeah, so I'm probably going to flip a little bit of the way y'all are saying. I say read it first. I am like Nicholas, but I can say for a fact, Daredevil was the first comic I ever read. I even remember the villain. The villain was this throwaway villain that was never seen again called the Surgeon General. And that was the first comic book I ever read. And Daredevil holds a special place in my heart. So just like Nicholas, when they came out with this movie, I was super excited. I do have a love for this movie, as much as you will hear me make fun of it throughout this episode. I have a love for this movie, but it is because of the love I had from the comics. So I would say read the comics, especially the Frank Miller stuff. If you want me to even be more specific, read Man Without Fear and then go watch the movie. I actually will disagree with Tim. I don't think this is a great introduction to the character in terms of a movie. I think you're going to get a better introduction from the comic. But this movie then, I think, does bring that character to life. Hey, this is a reference to the soundtrack.
Well, I'll ask you this. Is it a better introduction than the introduction of Daredevil in The Trial of the Incredible Hulk?
Oh, absolutely.
I rest my case.
Absolutely. 100%. Although The Trial of the Incredible Hulk at least went even more comic accurate with the suit than this one did. They just right off the bat have him in the red suit, and that's not comic accurate at all. Step into the world of Stephen King, where every story is larger than life, and every adaptation is king-sized. Join us on King-Sized, the podcast that dives deep into the biggest and most haunting adaptations of Stephen King's iconic works. From page to screen, we explore the twists, turns, and terrifying moments that have made his stories unforgettable. Whether it's the horrors of a haunted hotel, the terror of a telekinetic teen, or the heartwarming tales of friendship, we break down the films and TV shows that brought King's nightmares and dreams to life. New episodes drop on special dates like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Stephen King's birthday. So get ready to join me and my co-host as we take a king-sized journey through the world of horror, suspense, and everything in between. Because when it comes to Stephen King, there's always more than meets the eye. Subscribe now to King Sized. Don't miss a single terrifying tale. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a trip around the spinner rack and just talk in depth as much as we can about this movie. I'm going to go ahead and forewarn you guys. I have a list when it comes to weird science. But before we get into it, as always, we start off with our speech bubble. What was our favorite quote from the movie? I'll go first since Tim's kind of already said mine.
I did it again.
But mine is Bullseye saying, "I missed. I never miss."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That I don't know why. I like Colin Farrell's delivery of that line for some reason. So
it's the accent.
And I have to perfectly, which I wasn't trying to really do an Irish accent. I will admit though that this is not a quotable movie. So
no, it's
so
not.
I'm very curious to see what you guys came up with. So Nicholas, how about you?
Oh, good. All right. So Matt Murdock says her name is Elektra Nachios.
Yeah.
And Foggy says, sounds like a Mexican appetizer.
Yeah. The best lines are Jon Favreau lines. I will say that.
Yeah. Not offensive at all.
Wait till you get to mine. I'm just kidding. Is it my turn now? That's all you had, Nicholas?
Sure. No, and it was a struggle to find that one.
Yeah.
Again, this is not a quotable movie.
I actually have 3.
Except for Tim. Tim finds it a quotable movie.
No, these are just the lines that stood out to me when I was watching it. The first one was the exchange between Kingpin and Bullseye. How do you kill a man without fear? By putting the fear in him, which I thought was like a decent line. Daredevil's line, they say your whole life flashes before your eyes when you die, and it's true even for a blind man, which I was like, okay, interesting, kind of take. But one of my favorite lines was from Favreau, and I'll have to edit it for obvious reasons. When he talked about going to the ball, it's gala, or I can't remember, gala.
Yeah.
That place is going to be crawling with people, rich people who pay their legal fees with money, not with fish or with wheels of cheese or with sports supplies. I'm going to fill you in on a little secret, Matt. This doesn't look like a law office, okay? It looks like the set of Sanford and Son. Every time I walk in, I'm waiting for Lamont to come down the stairs. Which that was funny. I thought it was great. Great line.
Yeah, I do like that when they're in their office, you just see
exactly.
These products and all that, and some of them have bows on them.
Yeah.
But like I want to say, like behind Foggy is a whole bunch of like, I could be wrong, but it looked like a whole shelf of like Snyder pretzels.
Oh, it could have been
behind him.
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all
caught
that.
When they were walking in, I was like, are those a bunch of KitchenAid mixers above the law books?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is great. All right, let's move on to our moving panel. So a moment or scene from the movie that felt straight out of the comic or just something we enjoyed. I'll, again, go first because Nicholas has already kind of alluded to this one. Elektra's death. I mean, that is straight out of the comic.
Mm-hmm.
And I do mean straight out of the comic, out of Daredevil 181. Even the lines, like Bullseye saying you're pretty good, but me, I'm magic. That's a panel. And then him throwing the card and slicing her in the throat. That's in that comic. And then of course the famous moment when he drives the sai through her and it protrudes out her back, but of course her clothing is still covered. But that very famous moment and scene in just comic history, not even just Daredevil, but in comic history. And so that is my absolute moving panel from this, and I think one of the best done straight from page to screen of most comic book movies.
I mean, that's the one I had, and then I had the Daredevil hanging on the cross in the very beginning. It was just like straight from the comic book. Mm-hmm. This, again, and I've said it already, but I'm going to say it again, compared to what they were doing at the time, this was the most comic accurate movie they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I read that the director would like pull comics out and say, I want this shot. Like he would work panels from the comics, he wanted the shots to look just like the panels. And it kind of plays that way, even before, Sin City? Because I think that came out 2005, maybe? Was that after?
I do believe it was after. Yeah.
So,
I don't know the exact date off the top of my head.
Yeah. We've talked about movies in the past, like, this looks like not what we would consider a movie that looks like a comic book. Like there are certain shots that are like, it's, no apologies. We want this to look like a comic. And so those are definitely scenes. You guys both mentioned the clinging to the cross, the playground scene, though it's like been much maligned, felt like that was a scene out of a comic, which I think they said part of it, or it was a derivative of one of the scenes in one of the comics. I think
he was fighting. I think he was fighting Echo.
He was. That's right.
Yeah, not Elektra. Much maligned by me. That's one of the ones I have on as just being a ridiculous scene. Like it's
I have it mentioned later too. Yeah, so
I didn't say it was a favorite scene. I just said it was a scene that I thought would come out of a comic book. And the sequence of Bullseye killing Elektra's father, that whole sequence seemed very comic-esque as well. I can't really say I have a favorite scene. Most of my favorite scenes are the comedy scenes with Jon Favreau, maybe. And and I think Elektra kind of stole the movie. Like, I think her fight scenes were better than Affleck scenes. Maybe not better. They were, I don't know, they were more enjoyable to watch. But,
Well, that's because it was Jennifer Garner.
Exactly.
I was Jennifer Garner.
I'll admit it. Yeah, that's why I said it.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get to where I think a lot of our discussion is going to go, and that is into our weird science. So I just mentioned the death of Elektra. I can't mention that without going into the fact that the angle of the sigh does not line up, as well as the length of the sigh does not line up. So I do have a problem with that. They take that iconic shot, but then you're just looking at the fact that the sigh and what's protruding out her back do not line up at all.
Back and to the left.
Yeah. But going back to the beginning of the movie, I love that when Matt, after he is blinded, he wakes up in the hospital. He hears the drip of the IV, an IV that is clearly not connected to him, as he just falls out of the bed right after that with clearly nothing connected to him. So how they know he's still alive is even a question in this. Yeah, I had a problem with that. I've already mentioned about his sense of touch somehow makes you stronger. I didn't get that. I'm just going to run through my list, and then if y'all want to talk about more, we can talk about more. Foggy and Matt are good close friends. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much established, right?
Right.
So why in the world did he think that Matt would not be able to tell the difference between a mustard bottle and a bear-shaped
That's on my
honey
list.
Bottle?
That one was on my list. It bothered me both times I saw it.
I mean, come on. Even take away the superpowers of Matt Murdock. What blind person is not going to be able to tell the difference? What seeing person that may just not be looking is not going to be able to tell the difference between I just grabbed a honey bottle, which is shaped like a bear, or just a straight cylinder mustard bottle.
And did you see how much mustard he put in that tea? I mean, come on. Even that amount of honey would have been a lot.
I mean, I like mustard not in... Well, I don't like coffee, so... but... I'm not one of the people who's a mustard hater, but like mustard has a smell.
Right.
Yeah, that too. Well, see, and Tim's talking about how much mustard he put in it. Do you think though, because he already knew it was mustard.
Yeah.
Right.
He was just playing along.
So do you think he was doing that because he also knew he was going to give it to?
Yeah, probably.
So that's probably why he put that much in it. So, all right, next up, another one that bothers me, and I remember this bothering me when I saw it in theaters, is the double D's in Urich's glasses when he lights the fire and he lights the logo, and then they show his glasses and they are not reflected. They are still in the correct position in his glasses. Makes no sense.
Before we leave that scene,
Yeah.
let's because I've got something that's a little bit equally as ridiculous about that scene on my list.
I have something as well.
What?
Hopefully it's not the same thing.
It might be. What practical reason would Daredevil have to put the DD in flammable, hoping
right?
Yep. Somebody threw a match or a cigarette or something on the ground to light it as a calling card of like, yep, that was me.
Yep,
it's so good that no one was standing on it when Ben liked
and
it.
so that was my note. Was like, how long has it been since he's been there? How has no cop that's been in that vicinity stepped on it and it's on their shoe or they've messed up, perfectly still a D and a D. Yeah. So that scene immediately caught my attention when I was like, it's a cool effect, but not logical at all.
I don't know what kind of fluid it was supposed to be, but most of that fluid doesn't last that long.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
it evaporates relatively quickly. So it was like, I don't even know why they thought that would be cool. Like, ooh, he left it. Like what?
Yeah, it's his calling card or something
that he never does again.
Yeah. And also, I didn't even write this one down, but just to get into this. Also, is he known or is he not known? Because you've got where the detective and Urich are talking about, I don't want to hear anything about your Daredevil, it's going to make a whole bunch of other vigilantes. But then you have when he's perched up in the bar right before he attacks Quesada and all those guys, and they go, "Who's this dude?" None of them have ever heard of the Daredevil that's apparently a legend, a myth in the papers. Not a single person in there.
They're bad guys. I don't read the news.
So there's a lot of inconsistency, I think, with should people know who the Daredevil is. All right, moving on. I just wrote this question down. What did Elektra think Matt hit her with when he ran into her in the coffee shop that she would then be surprised that he's blind? Because he hits her with his walking stick. So what did she think hit her?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a good one.
That scene was, other than just to have the joke of, what are you, blind?
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Oh, now I'm
ashamed and embarrassed and had to throw in that little comedic bit. And then I wrote this down. All the fight scenes.
All of them?
I just wrote all the fight scenes.
You mean you didn't enjoy the wire work that they take the wires away that we'd seen 1,000,000 times since The Matrix came out?
Well, this is what I wrote. I said the playground scene felt like something out of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yeah. And it was.
The way that they flip, the way it starts with the two of them in the poses, and it's like, round one.
Yeah.
Fight! As Matt catches his walking cane. And then them jumping up on the seesaw. Very
amazingly, they're both the same weight.
Now, the only reason I didn't write down the fight scenes or the wire work and the jumping around and the jumping the 900 feet from building to building was that you always say, does it make the logical sense does it break the logic within its own movie? And since all of them can do it.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
You do have a point there.
Yeah, that's good.
It's all a ridiculous, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon fight world.
But here's my response to that. Matt should be the only one with powers, though. Elektra does not have any heightened abilities. Bullseye, yes, he does have his, accuracy, but that's not a power. That's just a skill. And so why can they do the same things that he can't?
Magic.
Bullseye does say, I'm magic.
Yes. Because he can stand on it. He can stand on a motorcycle too. So
you're just going with what you've established in previous episodes that whatever physics exists in this world, allows everybody to kind of do the same general thing. So I didn't write it down because
but then you take away the fact that Matt has heightened abilities.
Well, Bullseye seemingly dies when he falls out of the church, where Daredevil can jump off the Empire State Building and just do some flippy flips on some window washing stations and make it to the ground.
How did he know those were going to be there? That's another question I have.
He could hear them.
There's no way he could sense them from where he was, based off of, anyway. That actually brings me to my next one here for Weird Science. So can Matt focus or not?
Yeah.
Because that is very inconsistent in the movie.
Yeah.
Because I get at the beginning, they do the thing with the subway train comes and that's so loud for him. But there's no way that subway train was louder than all the gunfire and noises that were happening in the bar just moments earlier. Yet he was still able to focus on whoever he was fighting at the moment.
Right. Well, the same thing about his sense of hearing. Like, if he has to get into a soundproof chamber or turn the loud music up to block out all the noise around him, when he's just walking down the street talking to Foggy between cases, can he block out the sound then? And I mean, like,
that's what I'm saying. Can he focus or not? Now, I will say, I get that he needs to do that to sleep. So, because it probably is a toll on him to focus.
Right.
So I get that he has the sensory deprivation chamber in order to sleep. I get that. Man, he's got to wake up all pruny. But
it's what the salt's for.
Yeah, it's just
salt water. Because
it's the same thing at the end with the organ that was 17 stories high. Because did y'all not think that too when he falls? It's like, how far you've got to fall, because the perspective they give makes it look like he is falling from the top of a skyscraper when he's falling off back down to the floor of the church. But yeah, it's the same thing with the organ. It's like, okay, but shouldn't the organ's making noise the entire time you're jumping up on it? And I didn't get that. It wasn't consistent enough for me.
Correct.
Do y'all have anything else that y'all had on your lists?
I had one that we haven't covered yet. So Kingpin, every time he kills somebody or has somebody killed, he leaves a rose.
Yes.
Calling card. Which is kind of like leaving telling the world, hey, I did this. Which means one of two things. It's either logical or completely and totally illogical, depending on how you want to go with it. The cops are either really stupid or totally
They did not
corrupt.
see two D's in some sort of liquid on the floor. So that answers that question.
That somehow they were not able to connect every crime that Kingpin did or every murder he did when he left a rose there and go, oh, Kingpin did it again. Like,
You ever notice how Fisk always wears a rose in his his suit jacket pocket? Coincidence? Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
Leave it alone.
Yeah.
So it's
circumstantial.
It's circumstantial. Yeah. Everybody loves roses.
Yeah.
So it's one of two things. It's the cops are either so dumb and bad at their job, or they're all in on it with fixed and they're all corrupt to begin with. So,
well, we have a vigilante, so that's probably the truth. Yeah. I'll say the only other thing that I had, which isn't so much the logic, what I thought was kind of plot holes, or the death of Elektra's father, and her immediately thinking it's Daredevil and being so hell bent on revenge, was a little weak for me. Like
that wasn't as weak as when she takes off the mask and immediately realizes she's wrong.
Right.
Like, what does seeing Matt make you automatically go, oh, I was wrong?
Right. Well, because she loved him.
Who's to say Matt didn't do it? Like,
yeah.
I had that one, but in a different section. So.
Yeah, and I mean, and once again, this is for all Secret Identity movies, but like, she's been intimate with Matt. We saw in the movie. Wouldn't she recognize his chin and his voice as he's Daredevil? I mean, I'm just,
that's just a comic book.
Yeah,
thing,
I know.
Superman's glasses.
But I am glad that he didn't change his voice to be like all hard and dark, like we have for Batman. So
no, he waited to do that until he was Batman.
Yeah.
All right. The only other thing I have is at the end of the movie, or really the whole third act, when all of a sudden the cops are going after Kingpin. The question I had is, with what evidence? because you have no evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the theatrical cut.
Not at
I was
all.
gonna say,
Not
not
at all.
allowed to talk about where the
Not
evidence
in the
came from.
theatrical cut.
Right.
So how are y'all going after the Kingpin at the end of this movie? No evidence was established in this movie. Yes, the director's cut fixed it. So you want to hear us talk about the director's cut? Tune in next week. We're going to talk about the director's cut. But I got some questions to ask the two of you when it comes to this movie. Let's talk about the element of his superpower, the sonar
Mm-hmm.
that we get. Do you think that worked? Like, was that a convincing way to portray his ability? Or do you think they could have done something different?
I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, I seem to remember at the time thinking it was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Now, much like a lot of
the CGI doesn't hold up. Yeah,
Right.
The CGI doesn't hold up.
And whatever setup my dad has down in the basement that I was watching the DVD on, it really doesn't hold up. The Disney Plus wasn't as bad, but
I don't think I know we're going to talk about that. I don't think the director's cut was as polished as the theatrical cut when it comes to the CGI.
That could explain that too. But
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But no, I liked it.
Yeah.
It definitely better than what we got later from Morbius with his sonar.
Yeah, I liked it. I thought it was good.
So.
Same with Nicholas. When I first saw it, that was one of the highlights of the movie for me. I thought those, being able to see that ability in that way was pretty cool.
I did have, again, some inconsistency problems with it. So like in the rain scene, his ability to see, I'm like, she's standing straight up. How can he see like her chin or her, like there's parts of her body that would not be getting hit by rain. And so some of it logically didn't make sense, but I was still okay with it. I was fine with it. If anything, it let everybody know that if you're going to be a supervillain, do not have clear glass water pipes going all throughout your office.
Yes, yeah, that was a little...
that's a bad decision.
Yeah.
So, and then finally, probably something that many people, even people who dislike this movie, remember, and that is the soundtrack. This is one of the most early 2000 soundtracks there could ever be.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a question. Does this soundtrack, does it help or hurt the atmosphere, the tone, the vibe of the movie?
I don't think it. I mean, it could be just me. We'll see what Tim says. I really like it. I remember that was in the day when I bought soundtracks like they were going out of style. So I definitely own this soundtrack. It's down in my basement somewhere.
Yeah, it definitely dates it a lot more than I thought it would. Like in the rewatch, I was like, oh man, this really, screams that period of time. And it's funny because like when I first started watching it again, I was like, I feel like the studio executive was like, that last song, the song that Nickelback did in Spider-Man, make every song just like that. And so it was like the only thing I didn't like about it is that every song was so much alike. Like there wasn't much variation. But I will say I really liked the House of Pain song at Bullseye's introduction, that being an Irish band and him being Irish, and obviously that took place in Ireland. That was a cool song. And then, of course, Evanescence, I remember those songs. They were big at that time. So it was cool to hear those songs again in the context of the movie. Exactly, yeah.
Because they hadn't even put their album out yet.
Yeah.
They even, because the music video that aired on MTV even featured the clips from Daredevil.
Right.
When Bring Me to Life actually their music video debuted. I was torn about it, so I think like the song that plays during, I can't remember the title of it, but the song that plays during Elektra's father's funeral, I think that worked for that scene.
You're right, that was a good song.
But as much as I do love the song Bring Me to Life by Evanescence, it was weird in her little training scene, like having it there while she's attacking these bags of sand. It again, a great song, but it something about it to me just didn't. It felt disconnected from that scene. And so I was and that was where I came up with the question to ask you guys. Like, do you think the soundtrack worked for the movie?
I mean, I hadn't thought of it in the context of that. I like the soundtrack.
Oh, it's a great soundtrack.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything against the music. It was more just how did it pair with the movie?
Yeah, was
really what I was looking for.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a couple of scenes where the song maybe didn't necessarily 100% match, but that early to mid 90s up until the late 2000 run of music, that 10, I guess it would have been like maybe 20-year time span of music, is my wheelhouse. So like that's right in there. Like,
Yep.
All right. Well, let's get into our final decisions. Bag it, stack it, or trade it. Nicholas, I will let you go first. What say you?
Okay. Now, there's a caveat because I know what we're about to do. So
we are rating the theatrical cut.
Right. But I know what we're going to do next week.
Yes. But we are rating the theatrical cut. The version you can see on Disney Plus.
Right. I'm going to say trade it.
Okay.
And I know I'm not allowed to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. But that's because the director's cut exists. Like, it's not a bad movie, but like, I know the other one is there.
Yeah. And I don't understand why. So, we're not too long past Christmas, and Disney Plus has Muppet Christmas Carol. But then if you go to the extras, they have the uncut version, the version that includes that missing song,
right,
which makes it makes this character development of Scrooge has this more depth to it because of this one song that's put in. So you can go to the extras, you can click on that version, and you can watch that version of Muppet Christmas Carol. Why doesn't Disney Plus have that for Daredevil, where I could go into an extra and click on the director's cut and watch the director's cut? I do not know why they don't put the director's cut out there.
Having just gone to see the Symphony Orchestra do a live version of the Muppet Christmas Carol back in December, I learned that because they showed the full-length version with the Love Is Gone song.
Yes.
And so I learned, hey, I can watch the unedited version on Disney Plus if I click it as an extra. So, like, immediately I went to Daredevil, and I was like, what do you mean I can't do the same thing?
Yeah, there's no extras.
Yeah.
All right, so a trade it from Nicholas. How about you, Tim?
I'm actually going to stack this one. I don't think it's not the worst comic book movie, because we've discussed those already.
And we still have more.
And it's not my favorite, and I don't think it deserves to be bagged. But it's one, I mean, I could, theatrical or director's cut, I would probably watch this again, just not anytime soon. I'm stacking it.
Yeah, no, I went with stack it as well. And as much as I love Daredevil, and this is you can call it a guilty pleasure, whatever you want to call it. I do really like this movie. And like Tim said, like, I could rewatch this movie, but it was the same thing. Ghost Rider's another one of those. Like, I could rewatch Ghost Rider over and over again. Does that make it a good movie? No. I think this is better than Ghost Rider, but I still put it as stack it. And now that Nicholas has said what he said, I think maybe some of it is because the director's cut exists. And not only that, I'll just go ahead and say it may even be because there's also the Netflix series. So there are better versions of Daredevil out there. Not just this movie with the director's cut, which we'll talk about more in depth next week, but the Netflix series, I think, does a better, even with the Frank Miller version of Daredevil. So yeah, it was a stack it for me too. But all right, well, let's get into our recommendations. So Nicholas will probably provide something that you should see other than this Daredevil movie, whereas Tim and I will probably provide you with something that you would go along with this Daredevil movie. So I'm going to go ahead and let Tim go first on this one.
I will say I didn't think too long and hard about this one. I think because it wants to duplicate so much of what we saw in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, even to the point where I felt like he was taking notes from Sam Raimi in some shots and some of the things he did.
Well, after the money it made.
Oh, yeah. Or if that's what the studio demanded that he do. I mean, I'd go back and watch the first Spider-Man with this and kind of see, the similarities and how much it borrowed from that one. So that's my recommendation. And you'll probably enjoy Spider-Man more.
So I'm actually going to stick with the exact same thing that I said for my watch it or read it. Again, if you do see the movie first, that's great, but still go read The Man Without Fear.
Mm-hmm.
As I've already mentioned, it's a heavy influence to this film. And so whether you read it first or read it after, I think it's a great companion piece to this movie. So, I think it pairs perfectly with the movie. Go read The Man Without Fear. So, all right, Nicholas, what should they see instead?
The Netflix series.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I figured you'd either say that or the director's cut.
Yeah. Well, there's more of that, but I would also put that obviously it came after, but there was some really good Daredevil stuff that happened in the comic books in the last I was going to say in the last couple of years, but I haven't read comic books in a while, so it's probably been 10 years now. Around the time that Original Sin and
Original Sin's good.
The Dark Avengers
Kingpin story. That's a great one.
The Dark Avengers series was happening. There was the Daredevil fighting in the whole Hell's Kitchen thing where I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of really good Daredevil stuff to read from the past, pre-movie and then after movie. So I mean, I'd recommend just the Marvel Knights run of Daredevil was pretty good. The Ultimate Daredevil stuff was really good. But I mean, if you're sticking with just watching something, there's 3 seasons of the Netflix show that's pretty solid.
Yeah.
We'll even go ahead and promote Born Again that will come out in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But all right, well, thanks for all of that, and thank you everybody for listening as we talk about, again, I will still say one of my favorite movies, even though I did give it a stack it. I do love Daredevil, but I am partial to it with it being my first comic book that I ever read. And I didn't think that Ben Affleck was a bad Daredevil either. But there you have it. We'll wrap things up here. Tune in next week as we are going to talk about the director's cut. We didn't want to add it into this one. We knew this episode was going to be long enough. The director's cut will probably be another 15 to 20 minute conversation. So we decided to make it a one shot. So tune in next week to find out what our thoughts are on the director's cut of Daredevil. But for today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
From print to screen, the legends stand. Comic games with the